Thank you, Anthony. I wanted to extend a special thanks to Anthony, who's really helped me think about the work I do with groups. So today I'll be talking about art-based group work with orphan children recently evacuated from Afghanistan. So I'll start by giving people a bit of a background to the formation of the group. I'll then move to some of the early experiences we had in that group and how we might think about those events and how the group evolved in response to those experiences over time. And then finally, I want to get to how working with the children at a group level was effective in addressing areas of difficulty and distress. So in terms of background to the formation of the group, it was formed in the broader context of the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan in August of 2021. And at that time, a group of Tajik children and young people were evacuated to Australia from the Maboba's Promise orphanage in Afghanistan. And I want to underline the role of Maboba Rawi, both in helping create those orphanages and sustaining them, and then in helping evacuate those children from Afghanistan in what were extremely difficult circumstances. It involved a protracted and perilous journey out of Afghanistan for the children via Pakistan, and there were actually a number of attempts were made at various times, and children were held up at the borders. In terms of the children, they all had histories of massive loss and trauma. There were loss of their primary caregivers. They were exposed to violence, both sometimes within families, but also outside of them in the broader Afghanistan context. They sometimes had distressing experiences when they got into institutional care, and they all had major vulnerabilities. I want to underline the Australian government's role in working to settle the children and to resettle them together, because there was a recognition that this was their family. The family were the other children they'd been housed with in the orphanage. So the way this group came about is Sydney schools where children were enrolled approached STARTS for assistance. And I'm going to be focusing on one group in particular with some boys and girls that were attending a primary school in northwestern Sydney. The children came from different types of resettled living arrangements. So some of them now had adoptive parents, but some of them were in group homes. They ranged in age from 7 to 12 years. The group began with 4 children, but grew to a total of 9 as more children arrived in Australia, because they didn't all come at once. The school reported to STARTS that the children had dysregulated behaviour, attachment issues, lack of engagement and compliance in school activities, amongst other things. Now, in terms of the structure of the groups, we started this particular group, with 2 workers, but eventually we were able to gain a 3rd worker, which was very helpful, and I'll get to why that might be so. The group consisted of weekly sessions. Introductory grounding and welcoming activity was the way the group started each week. And then there was a longer period of semi-structured art making. And there was some guidance and support from workers in the use of art materials, but in a general sense, the children were fairly free to make art and interact with each other. So what was the early experience of running these groups? Well, there were lots of issues around beginning and ending. So we had the children sometimes would turn up early, even though they knew the time that the group was starting. It was difficult to get them to wait. Sometimes they would leave and then they wouldn't return on time. So there were also issues around the ending of the groups, in the sense that a lot of the children would protest about the end and would refuse to leave the room. We also experienced the dysregulation, the kinds of meltdowns over seemingly small incidents and rapid shifts in behaviour amongst the children. They could go from being fairly engaged in an activity and suddenly becoming very upset about something. There was actual hitting and kicking, both of, with the children hitting each other, kicking each other, but sometimes we were on the receiving end of that as well. There was snatching, grabbing and hoarding of art materials. There was trying to damage or destroy other children's artwork. The bringing of hard balls was a common occurrence into the group, and then throwing these around the room, which could result in the breakage of things, and certainly could actually hurt if someone was hit with a hard ball. And that did in fact happen, not only from being hit with balls, but from being punched and kicked sometimes. There was really general chaos as we tried to manage what was happening and find what might work in running a group. Having said all that, the children also displayed some real enthusiasm and engagement in art making. And there was an intermittent kind of constructive engagement with us and sometimes with each other. So I want to share some vignettes with you which may give you a greater sense of some of what was going on. So the first vignette is of one of the group workers was arriving late, and the children had been informed of this, and they made a model, or what we could call an effigy, of the worker who had not arrived, using cushions and a ball for his head. The children were amused by their creation and admiring of it. And then one of the children kicks the ball head right off with force. A second vignette. A girl is stopped from throwing a hard ball. It is taken from her. She storms out of the room, leaving the group. One of the workers goes out to try and find her and coax her back to the group. It's only after some time that they both return together to rejoin the group. A third vignette. A girl is agitated and angrily refuses to participate in the group activity done in a circle in the first phase of the group session. So we began the groups with a structured kind of settling activity, and this girl categorically refused to do that. She was very angry about it. She's left alone to sit at a table and begin art making. She quickly settles. She remains settled when the other children join her in art making. A fourth vignette. One week the group must use a different room, so we had an occasion where the school had to use the room that we normally had. And in this new room there was a pervasive sense of chaos as the children move around the room, moving and piling up furniture rather than engaging in art making, which is what they typically would do. The art making at this point appears to hold little interest for them. And some of the children use string to connect and bind objects themselves and the group workers to each other. So this is my last vignette. Some children in the group are very loud, throwing things around the room, whilst other children are much quieter and appear very vigilant. They seem very concerned about the noise and are quite worried about it. The vigilant children gravitate to specific workers and stay close to them. They're quiet and compliant in the group. Oops. For some children, this is a regular and consistent pattern. However, for others, the compliance ends with a sudden meltdown when it's time to stop. So even these children that were more compliant, sometimes we'd see these sudden changes at the end of the group. So how can we begin to think about these experiences in the group? Now, whilst the experiences outlined above involve individual responses, they are also expressions of something that is occurring in the group collectively. For example, the girl who kicks the head off the effigy is expressing something that the other children are also likely to be feeling about abandonment and attachment in the group at that point. Viewed in this way, what occurs in the group offers us a way to think and work with all the children in mind. So I hope this connects up with Anthony's earlier presentation and discussion. So thinking about the experiences in the group, taken together, the vignettes are all suggestive of feelings of dislocation, disruption, insecurity, broken attachments, and a struggle to connect. We can think of the difficulties around beginnings and endings, of not staying, of returning, the reaction to a group worker's absence, the children's reactions when the room changes and some of the children begin binding and joining themselves and us together. Can the group be trusted? Is it solid and reliable? Will it still be there when we return? These are some of the possible questions that are occurring at some level collectively amongst the children. The vignettes also illustrate the children's capacity for working collectively and playfully in representing their experience. For example, in the binding of group members together or in making a model of the absent worker, that clearly is a reflection of their capacity to symbolise their experience and to creatively represent it, if you like. However, the force of some of the feelings that were elicited were very powerful, as reflected in kicking the head off. So now I want to think about how we can develop the group to respond to the children's needs and capacities. One way the themes I've suggested around issues of loss and dislocation were playing themselves out in the group was in the children's struggle to relate and connect with themselves, with each other, and with us, without the interaction breaking down in some way. Closely associated to this was their apparent difficulty in feeling consistently safe with us and each other. We thus made developing the children's capacities for relating to their own feelings, to each other, and feeling safe a central focus of the group. So, how did we do this? This involved a range of steps. We ensured that the group met regularly each week. The regularity and stability of the group is key to the children feeling safe and at ease. The regularity of the group also includes the children's membership of the group. So absences were acknowledged and remembered by assigning the children that weren't there that week an empty chair. This underlines the continued membership of the absent children in the group and keeps them present in the minds of the other group members. We set limits where necessary, but allowed flexibility whilst trying to contain what was going on. We stopped children from getting hurt. I mean, sometimes that involved us, and that tended to be the way, you know, when we were actually hit or kicked, it was the fact that we got between children that were wanting to hit or kick each other, or a child that wanted to kick another child. Children who stormed out were followed and coaxed to return with patience. We provided our attention and, where appropriate, our sympathy. We were never authoritarian or punitive. It was never about behavioural management, if you like. We understood that the children were struggling to trust the world. We sought to maximise the children's degree of control, and we supported examples of cooperation, sharing and moderation. We allowed the free use of art materials in the containing frame of doing art on paper, using tables and so on. In this way, the children gained agency and were able to explore and express strong feelings in a safe way in the group. I now have a couple of examples of that, of some of their artwork. In a sense, the art making became what we could call a potential space to carry the more powerful and difficult feelings. So this is one of the artworks. There's some other artwork. So using the group to focus on relating and feeling safe. We can say that the art making occupies a relational function as well within the group, whereby participants can communicate within the group via their art making. It is not the art making in itself that is therapeutic, but its use within a supportive frame. The challenge is to find a harmonious balance between structure and artistic expression. So one can envision an unbounded free-for-all that would not be therapeutic, it would just be chaotic. Similarly, one could be too rigid and highly structured in a group, and that would limit expression and feel oppressive. The interest and investment of the group workers in the art making is critical to finding that balance between structure and creative expression. If the children don't feel that the art making is meaningful and important to the group therapists or to the group workers, they won't be able to enjoy the art materials and their own creativity. It's also important that the group therapists not be overly focused on art and art making in a technical sense, as this can inhibit the children. So it was about encouraging the children to be creative, not about aesthetics. So in terms of group observations over time, the children are far more settled. That was clearly evident in the group. And the school also reported that they found that as well in terms of the children outside the group, in their classrooms, in the playground, and so on. There was an end to physical conflict. Children stopped hitting and kicking. The children began attending the group on time and leaving without protest. The children no longer appeared distressed when given instructions by adults, by the group workers. And there were increasingly there were examples of turn-taking and reciprocating between the children and with the group workers. So children were able to wait for their turn if, for example, they needed to wait for some art materials or to share something. And there was also this reciprocation where they would then say, for example, help us clean up the room and tidy up, or get the art materials out for them to use. The children increasingly interacted with each other rather than staying close to specific workers in terms of that subgroup that gravitated to workers. Over time, the content of artwork becomes interspersed with themes that are more explicitly suggestive of the children's experiences and of powerful feelings, as we saw above. And the need for 3 workers was no longer present, despite the group having increased in size. So in conclusion, I hope that I've been able to provide an overview of the work that took place in running the group with the orphan children that were evacuated from Afghanistan. And I also hope that I've been able to convey the value of working at a group level with the group process to engage with the challenges the children face and the experiences with which they're still struggling. Thank you. Some references.